We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and don't be afraid. I'm part of the family. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. This week, we are talking the 1992 film Alien 3. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my fresh out of cryosleep co-host, Andrew Williams. Are you ready for this one, Andrew? You well rested? You ready for this?
I mean, I wouldn't say fresh out of cryo sleep, but core body temperature still coming back up. But yeah, this is an interesting movie to talk about. It's an interesting movie just from start to finish. And it'd been a while since I've watched the theatrical, so I was excited to dive back in and see what is David Fincher's debut film in the director's chair.
Yeah, you mentioned it's been a while since you watched the theatrical, myself as well. About 20 years ago, they released what they call the assembly cut, which is not the director's cut because David Fincher was not involved, but it restored some deleted scenes and tried its best to get back to Fincher's original vision for the movie. And that's the version that I typically watch. I assume you as well. But what's your history with this movie overall? Did you see the theatrical maybe back in the day during the 90s?
Well, it came out when I was 5, 92, I think. So I definitely wasn't seeing this in theaters. My parents were taking 5-year-old Andrew to watch this.
Right.
Probably showed up on TV when I was growing up. I remember watching Aliens a lot. My brother loved Aliens. Like growing up, that was one of his jams. But I don't feel like we watched Alien 3 as much or at all. My parents, like in our vast library of recorded off television movies, I don't know if Alien 3 was actually in there. Obviously once, the advent of DVD and living on my lonesome and having control of my finances set in, I bought one of the veritable smorgasbord of Alien collections that were out there and started watching both versions of this, probably 15 years ago. So not something that I was with from day one. And then obviously as you get big into film, you learn who David Fincher is, and you base your entire identity for several years off characters in his movies. And then realize that's a terrible thing.
Naturally.
That's why I started trying to jump into molten lava pits when I was in my 20s, because that's what she does here. Yeah, so I've watched it off and on over the years, but when that assembly cut came out, and I feel like I remember like hearing when that came out, like when that was going to be a thing, they were doing the assembly cut of it. I was very interested because even at that point, I knew there was a controversy, if you will, about the making of this film. So it's been on my radar for a while, but definitely not something I grew up with. Not like Aliens or even Terminator.
Gotcha. I didn't grow up watching any of the Alien movies. I saw them much later, probably sometime in high school. I finally dove into them. But before that, before I actually watched any of them beginning to end, I was probably most familiar with Alien 3, just from osmosis, just from being around in the 90s when it actually came out versus those first two movies, and probably being on cable a lot. I know I've seen scenes from this movie on TV, just never kind of sat down and watched it beginning to end. But there's a few truly iconic shots that have stuck with me. And we'll talk about them as we talk about the scenes. I do think it's very interesting that this movie, whose legacy is basically, this is the first, quote, bad Alien movie, first bad movie in the franchise after those first two films are hailed as all-time classics. The first misstep might be the nicest way people tend to put it. Despite all that, it still has some of the most iconic shots you will ever see in the franchise. I think it's very funny. It reminds me of like Eye of the Tiger not showing up until Rocky, 3 or 4? I always forget. It comes 3, right? Yeah, it comes up very late in that franchise, and then it becomes like the theme song for the whole series.
Or like Jason's mask in Friday the 13th is not a thing until the third movie. Like it's always interesting to see how, and especially in a situation like this where the first movie is well over a decade before this one, to still have those iconic shots coming in later is still pretty cool. So yeah.
We're going to jump into it as this month rolls along, our Alien and Predator month. We have already tackled 2 movies from the Predator franchise. Now we're switching gears over to Alien, appropriately starting with Alien 3, the movie that was released May 22nd of 1992, made on a budget of $60 million. At the box office, it brings in $160 million. Enough to be a success or profitable, but well below expectations and below the previous entries in the franchise. Critically, not very well received, just a 46% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics. That is on the low side of mixed, I would say. Now, here's what's interesting, Andrew. The audience score is also 46%, the exact same score. We've said it a million times on this podcast. Typically, audiences are a little bit more lenient. It's always a little bit higher on the audience side, but it's exactly the same. On top of that, being that this movie is 30 years old now, the critic score is only based on 61 reviews.
Right.
Movies from that era, just they don't collect as many reviews as modern movies. The audience score is based on over 250,000 reviews, and they still both come out to 46%.
Well, and that's even more ironic because last week for The Predator, the tomato meter and the audience score for the critics were exactly the same. They were both 33%. So who would have thought that we'd have 2 movies in a row where the critics and the audiences aligned perfectly? The odds are apparently greater than me winning that $1 billion lottery because I didn't. So, but yeah, it's that is the legacy, though. I mean, you ask anybody about Alien 3, and the general mindset is, There's a lot of people that do appreciate Fincher attempting it. Even the most diehard of fans admit that it kind of got taken away from him. I did speak badly about this movie once and make somebody really mad at the Alamo Drafthouse. I don't know if I've ever told you about that, but that's a story for.
Well, you have to tell the story now. You brought it up.
So I used to be a host at the Alamo Drafthouse. I don't know if I've shared that on the show before. Anyway, I was that guy that, like, before you'd go watch like a special edition movie, would get up and talk beforehand. You know, that guy you really didn't like, and we're kind of like, why are you here before a screening of Alien 3?
They're always hilarious and charming, Andrew. What are you talking about?
Sure they are. But anyway, I was doing a screening of Seven. And you know, Seven is a great movie. And it's David Fincher's movie that he does many, many years after this. But in my intro for the film,
it's like 3 years after this. What are you talking about?
It's like 4. Whatever. It's many years. It's what is many? Is many 5?
Isn't it his next movie?
Okay, it's a few years. Well, after this movie, he almost doesn't make a movie again. It takes a few years for him to come back. Is that better? A few years?
Listen, movie expert. Alien is 92. Seven is 95. That's a very normal gap in filmography.
Yeah, but he still didn't want to make movies after this. Don't give me your crap, Chris. Anyway, so in my intro for Alien, so in Alien, we had a very weird pre-movie kind of game where we had 2 people, and then I like gave them a box, and it was the whole kind of like, what's in the box, man? That was the whole vibe they were going for. It did not land. I don't know if it's because I didn't get it or if it was just a very strange game. Probably both. But either way, that lucky winner went home with a box of SpaghettiOs. But in my intro for the film at that point, I mentioned that David Fincher's previous film was Alien 3, which was known for not being very good. Those are my exact words. 2 people that were there sent a very multi-pointed email to the manager of the facility, breaking down several issues they had, to be fair. There was like, if I had been the perfect host, they would have still probably had a variety of points to make. But one of the ones was specifically calling out how I trashed Alien 3, and the Alamo Drafthouse should be instead propping up films that take risks with cinema. And to this day, I would never describe Alien 3 as a movie that's taking risks with cinema. And of all the other, like, there were other things, like it was right after Vintage Park had opened. So, like, the seating system was not great. Like, the tables were all solid, so there was no good way of getting in or out if you had to go to the bathroom or something. If you came in late, there was no real good way to get to other seats, so people were getting shifted around. they were working out all the kinks of that. So a lot of their complaints were related to things like that, but they just started tacking on. They were like, the game was stupid. He trashed Alien 3. He was making people move in their seat. I was just like, good Lord. And I felt really bad because, you don't want to ruin anybody's time, but I didn't think I was that mean about Alien 3. And just the fact that that's the way they chose to describe it has stuck with me to this day.
It's funny because they are almost in the spirit of the hashtag positivity podcast. They're almost like, I can see a point of being like someone presenting a special screening of a film to more than average film lovers, shouldn't quote trash movies, shouldn't speak negatively, should be propping them up. I get that, but the legacy is the legacy. It's, the legacy
I also
of the movie
didn't
is
say
what it
the
is.
movie
Like,
was bad.
sure.
I want to make that very clear. I said it was known for not being good. I did not say it was bad. That was my cover for myself. As I was like, I'm not actually saying the movie is bad. I essentially said, I'm saying the legacy is that, it sent Fincher away from film for a while. Where like when 7 was the thing that like he was like, all right, I get to do what I want for 7. No one's going to get in my way. And that was the only point I was trying to make. It was literally like 6 seconds of my 5-minute intro. And that was the thing they were like, how dare he? And so
I truly wonder if those people that sent the email to this day think about this moment the way that you do. Because I have heard you tell the story before.
Yeah.
It clearly left an impression. But I wonder if they're like, man, I don't go to Alamo anymore. Last time I went there, this guy just trashed Alien 3. And I'm not going to stand for that. I wonder if it's stuck in their mind.
Part of me hopes yes, because then it's at least balanced out. The other half assumes probably not. But
they sound like the kind of people that send a lot of emails, though. I've never.
They sound like the kind of person that asks to speak to the manager a lot. And so like I said, I understand that. And like I said, to clarify here, there was a very long point they were making. They basically went to Vintage Park and claimed to have a miserable time, and were basically just unloading on the management as far as what happened ever. And at that point, they were going for everything, no matter how imagined or real. And so I told the boss, I was like, Jesus, I wasn't trying to make anybody upset. I wasn't trying to mess with anything. I just brought it up as like a point. It was literally this short. And he kind of was just like, don't let it bother you too much. He's like, I once literally did a trivia contest where afterwards I realized I called everybody stupid for not knowing any of the questions. So he was like, just don't. He's like, don't worry about it too much. But I was just like, dang, like you never want to ruin somebody's night. And to this day, I feel like I did. So sorry, folks that really loved Alien 3. I took a while to get there.
The host looks like Seth Rogen, and I hate Seth Rogen's movies.
This freaking guy. Yeah.
All right, but let's talk more
point.
about Alien 3. Alien 3 has a number of screenwriters to credit. It's written by David Giler, Walter Hill, and Larry Ferguson. And I don't suspect that the three of them got into a room and hashed this out. This seems to be credits over multiple revisions, passing it from hand to hand that try to spice up the script or change it. The production of this movie, we'll talk more about it, is quite a mess. But let's dive into these writers. We have David Giler, who has been writing movies for Hollywood for a very long time. Credits go back to the early 70s, responsible for the original Fun with Dick and Jane back in 77. Also, The Money Pit, that Tom Hanks movie from the 80s. He's a producer on all of the Alien movies, all the way through Alien Covenant. And I should say, R.I.P. David Giler passed away in 2020, so pretty recently. But he is our first credited writer here.
Yeah, he also wrote a favorite of mine, The Parallax View, a political thriller starring Warren Beatty from the mid-'70s. So no slouch whatsoever. Was also a producer, an executive producer on Tales from the Crypt, and was an executive producer as such on all the Tales from the Crypt films that were made. Was a big part of that. But yeah, he kind of ends up getting that lifetime Alien producer credit on pretty much anything that's got aliens in it. The Alien versus Predator, all of those. Also, apparently did some uncredited script revisions on the original Alien. So definitely kind of one of the, I guess at this point in time, one of the stalwarts of the franchise, one of the shepherds, if you will, still trying to keep some sense of continuity through all the films. But yeah, rest in peace. But yeah, no slouch. Tons of credits to his name. So
You also got Walter Hill in there. Also, no slouch, as you say, Andrew. Not just a writer, but a director and producer as well. This man has done everything there is to do on the creative side of film. He directed The Warriors, the cult classic film that is very good.
yes,
I don't know where I was going with that.
great job. Oh.
Also, the director of the movie 48 Hours, which is written by almost friend of the show, Stephen E. D'Souza. He's one of the writers on that movie.
Yes.
For anybody that maybe missed it, we've been acknowledged officially by Stephen E. D'Souza on Twitter. He responded to us. It was very nice. Very cool moment.
It was very nice. Has not chosen to further engage with us yet, but we'll see.
No, hasn't accepted the invite to be on the show, but I'm holding out hope.
But yeah, like I said, tons of credits to his name. Did a movie I kind of like called Trespass, which has got Bill Paxton, Ice Cube, Ice-T in the same movie, and William Sadler. Also involved with Tales from the Crypt, directed several episodes. Was also a director on Deadwood, all over the place. No slouch at all whatsoever. And has also been with this franchise since the beginning. So another one that's just kind of had his hand in guiding it pretty much the entire time.
And then lastly, we have Larry Ferguson, who another longtime writer in Hollywood, the writer of Highlander, another cult film, and the 2002 remake Rollerball. Andrew,
Goodness.
when's the last time you thought of the 2002 movie Rollerball starring Chris Klein?
I don't think of that movie very often at all, Chris. I did just recently think about the original Rollerball because the star of that film, James Caan, just passed away. And as such, I rewatched the original Rollerball, which is a very great dystopic film that I am actually quite a fan of. We can talk about that at another time. But yes, the 2002 movie Rollerball, featuring Chris Klein, LL Cool J, and Paul Heyman, amongst others. So
Paul Heyman's in there? I just pulled up the wiki because Rebecca Romaine is in there, we should say. I saw this movie in theaters, Andrew.
As did I.
2002.
As did I.
Really? This is incredible. The budget was $70 million. At the box office worldwide, $25.9 million. And we contributed to that.
We did. But Paul Heyman plays like the commentator for the rollerball games. That's
perfect casting.
Yeah. He's
I remember nothing about it, but I kind of want to rewatch it.
It's the original is based around the concept that in the future corporations rule the world, which, how fictional. But the idea is that in order to keep society kind of entertained, they created a sport called rollerball, which is a sport so brutal and dangerous, no one is supposed to be able to be good at it. So it strips away the sense of individuality because there is no such thing as a sports star anymore. So you enjoy the spectacle, but nobody can get good at it. The original James Caan, though, is a guy who has gotten good at it. And as such, he runs afoul of the corporations that are in charge of everything and ends up on figuring out, realizing basically that the course of history has been controlled and modified. And in some cases, legitimately modified by these groups. And it, of course, culminates in a sports game because in a world with corporate conspiracies, it ends in a sports arena. But so I don't know how much of that the remake plays with. I feel like it does to a degree because I remember some sequences kind of checking some of those boxes. But yeah, I don't.
I'll rewatch it and let you know, Andrew.
Please don't.
There's a line on the wiki that this movie was made in 2002 and it's best summed up with this line here. The film features cameo appearances by Pink, Slipknot, and Shane McMahon. Well,
nothing says 2002.
Quite like
Lord.
That trio right there.
Yeah, my God. I do want to call out there is actually a further story credit to a fourth person on this film, name of Vincent Ward, who is, I can't say he's somebody I'm super familiar with. The only thing he's done that I've seen particularly is What Dreams May Come, which he just directs, but otherwise he's another writer, director. It's so weird to me that this movie is like written by 4 different people who like direct their own movies by and large.
Well, what's interesting about that is there's many versions of this movie as they go from creator to creator to try to hatch it. Vincent Ward is brought on as the intended director, and he's the one that hatches the story that they go with. And then they fire him from the director, but keep his story and then revise it with the essentially producers of the franchise. So writing is on the wall from the beginning as far as the tumultuous production of this film.
Yeah, the I mean, and there's so many different versions of that script out there. One of the ones that I remember and actually gained a little bit of traction recently is William Gibson, who is a noted science fiction writer who has written, amongst other things, Neuromancer, and a whole trilogy came from that. But he's a noted cyberpunk science fiction writer. So him writing an Alien movie sounds like a slam dunk. It did not come to pass, but recently they turned it into a comic, which is a common thing now. I know they do that with anytime somebody gets a hold of like an unproduced script for a film. There's a comic company out there just salivating at the idea of turning it into a comic. And then it was done as a book as well. And then they did an audio drama of that script where Michael Biehn and Lance Henriksen reprised their roles. So I think that's kind of cool. But yeah, needless to say, this movie is it's a little rough from start to finish.
Ultimately, it is directed by David Fincher. But don't tell him that I said that. I think he would prefer that if his name could be removed from this movie completely, I think it's exactly what he would do. I would say that he's trash-talked this movie, but honestly, he just doesn't talk about it. He's totally disowned his work on the film. Before this, he's primarily known as a music video director. This is, as we mentioned earlier, his feature film debut. And I have no source for this, but the feeling that I get is that the producers of this film felt like they could grab a relatively unknown director sort of as a placeholder, and then they kind of ghost direct it behind him, and that's what they attempted. Little did they know that they happened to pick the most notoriously meticulous director of the modern era. He's like the modern Stanley Kubrick with how aggressive he is on the number of takes and the perfectionist that he is, which I think was evident from the very beginning. So regardless, they clashed pretty hard, and they demanded reshoots and script changes mid-film, and it's just a nightmare production by all accounts. But there are moments, we'll talk about in the scenes, where you can kind of see the David Fincherisms in there. You can kind of see hints of his future work still come through, despite all the tumultuous nature of the production.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me to kind of go back to the beginning of a director's career and kind of see if they came out the gate, fully formed, or if it's something that was a process over several films. Somebody like Fincher is somebody that by 7, a lot of it is clicked into place, and that's only a second film. So it's interesting to see him kind of get it that quick. But you see the pieces here, a lot of the way some of the scenes are shot, the way things are set, the way they're designed. You can see that Fincher is like kind of really trying. You can kind of tell that he would like to do. He doesn't have as much control as he would like. But
right.
It's interesting. Like Christopher Nolan is another one that, like, when you watch Following, his first film, kind of shot on like a hand cam. It's really rough, but you can see the hints, and then by the time he gets to Memento, like, I think he's Chris Nolan at that point. And then obviously it gets bigger and crazier from there, but like by Memento, he's got it. He's figured it out. So it is interesting, even as just that exercise, to go back and watch this film. But I do think there's plenty to like here.
I agree. Andrew, we had a question of the week a while back asking us if we've ever seen the entire filmography of any directors or actors. We did not bring up David Fincher, but I'm about to read through his filmography to you, and you tell me if you've seen every one of these movies. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Alien 3.
Yes.
7.
Yes.
The Game.
Mm-hmm.
Fight Club.
Uh-huh.
Panic Room.
Yeah.
Zodiac.
Yep.
The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Uh-huh.
The Social Network.
Yes.
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Uh-huh.
Gone Girl.
Yep.
Mank.
Is that the Netflix one?
Yes.
Yes.
You seen that? Okay.
That's the one about Citizen Kane, right?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Yeah. I've seen that. Gary Oldman. Yep, I have.
There you go. You add that one to your list. I have almost seen all of these. I haven't seen The Game. I own it. Haven't watched it. That old tale. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I never watched. His Daniel Craig remake. And Mank. I haven't seen. So I'm gonna knock out those
Readaptation,
three
Chris.
So that, the readaptation of the novel. Excuse me. Thanks for holding me honest to that, Andrew. Very important. And I mentioned earlier he was known for music videos. I mean, he was a premier music video director. Janie's Got a Gun by Aerosmith, Vogue by Madonna. He was the director of that. And what I think is really cool is he transitioned to film and didn't get the attitude that he's like too good for music videos. He did Suit and Tie by Justin Timberlake back in 2013.
Yeah, and that's
Sure,
like
he
after
paid handsomely for it, but it's very cool that he did that.
That's like after Social Network and like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. That's when he was like, that was when he was David Fincher and like he was hugely in demand. Not that he's not still in demand, but it's always cool to kind of see people go back to the song that brought them to the dance, as it were.
What's your favorite David Fincher movie? Do you have one? Does one stand out?
Zodiac is like the first one that comes to my mind. Like I know Fight Club is like super
Same.
hyped and everybody loves Fight Club. I do like The Game, even if I think it's a little auspicious. Seven obviously is great, but Zodiac I think is the one that like I think is like the best fully formed.
Yeah, I agree. I would pick Zodiac if I had to pick one, but it's sort of 1A and 1B between Zodiac and the Social Network.
Social Network is also very good.
Perfect films, but Zodiac just kind of plays a little bit more to David Fincher's aesthetics and strengths. Dude loves serial killers, very weird, but Zodiac is a serial killer movie unlike any other. It's weirdly captivating, even though there's not a lot of quote-unquote action, and it's got a very long run length, but it still works tremendously and builds suspense in very unique ways.
Even though, again, Zodiac is something that to this day is still not solved. So the fact that he was able to take an unsolved mystery, no less,
right,
and create this super long, captivating drama out of it is a huge achievement. And I mean, obviously, it's stacked with some great talent. The greatest actor of all time. When I say the greatest actor of all time is in that movie, Chris,
I didn't know who you're going to
do
say.
you think I'm saying? Because there's a few in that movie. Jake Gyllenhaal, obviously.
The first one I thought of just now was Robert Downey Jr., though, who's also in that movie. That was sort of part of his ramp up to his big comeback. But Mark Ruffalo's in there.
Mark Ruffalo's in it.
Very good.
Brian Cox is in it. Casey Jones is in it. Donald Logue is in it. John Carroll Lynch, who
Drew Carey's brother is in it.
Yeah, John Carroll Lynch. It's legitimately like stacked. I mean, Philip Baker Hall is in that movie randomly, but Zodiac is just great. And
very good.
I do like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo because I like those books. That movie is really brutal. It is.
Yeah, I've seen like half of the first adaptation of that, the foreign film, and I was like, I don't know why I stopped watching it. I got pulled away, and I was like, if you see like part of a depressing movie, like I've seen the first 30 minutes of Jojo Rabbit. I had rented it, but like my stream was messing up, and I was like, I'm not going to sit through all these, constantly stops and restarting. And I saw some really depressing stuff in there in that beginning of that movie. And it's hard to get back in the mood to go back and watch it. And I'm kind of like that with this franchise here, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I'm like, I know it's going to be like really brutal stuff. When am I ever sitting around? And it's like, you know what? It's a good time to sit down and watch this. I own Schindler's List, Andrew. I've never watched it, though, because
I've watched Schindler's List exactly
twice.
Yeah, even Gone Girl. Like, Gone Girl is a movie by his that I really, actually, really, really like. It is basically just like the book. If you've ever read the book, the endings are exactly the same. But it's another one. Fincher kind of gets crap for this, but he makes movies with unsatisfying endings a lot of the time because the bad guys win in a lot of his movies. Not win in like the classic sense, but like Zodiac never gets caught. The Social Network, Zuckerberg kind of gets away with all of it. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo kind of is one of the few that like the bad guy is apprehended and there's kind of a happy ending. But Gone Girl is one where you get to the ending and like it's a deeply frustrating ending. Like, it narratively makes sense, but like from a personal perspective, you're just like, I hate all of you. Like, I can't stand it. But yeah, today I learned I've seen all of David Fincher's movies.
All right. Well, we're talking about one of those movies, specifically Alien 3. Let's go. After an alien on board a spaceship escape pod starts a fire, the vessel crashes onto a planet inhabited only by the all-male inmates of a maximum security prison. Ellen Ripley is the only survivor, but soon discovers the reason for the crash. The alien begins its breeding process and starts killing the inmates one by one. It falls onto Ripley to devise a plan to kill the alien, as she is the only one who has faced it before. Things get complicated when the Wayland Corporation sends a rescue vessel with the intention of capturing, not killing, the alien. Vowing to keep the potential bioweapon out of their hands, Ripley seeks to kill both the murderous alien that's loose in the prison and the one growing inside of her. What a twist. I feel like even people that have never seen this movie know about that, right? That seems to be one of the most famous plot points of the movie, that she has an alien inside of her.
Yeah. That's pretty, I'd say it's pretty well known.
Yeah. A cool way to take the franchise. You know what? I just kick off the hashtag PP early here. Generally speaking, I like the Alien franchise a lot. And I like how every entry seems to be different, almost different genres at times, which I think is a cool way to do it. I think Aliens, Alien $, and T2 are probably the best sequels of all time. Although I got to throw Top Gun Maverick in there now. Top Gun Maverick is on that level. But those two movies I think are extremely interesting to study because they're basically the two different directions that you can take a sci-fi action franchise. Terminator 2 is Terminator 1, but dialed up to 11. And then Aliens is the concept of Alien thrown into a completely different genre, a fun action genre versus horror. And those are both very cool approaches to a franchise. And those are both huge success stories that happen to be by the same director. Incredible stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's something that just the franchise allows for it too. Like, it's got these concepts where it's really easy to kind of attach these base concepts to different settings, different eras, different everything. And I always appreciate when there's an attempt made to kind of not just do the same thing. But then again, like you just said, sometimes you can do the same thing and it can succeed. As James Cameron does.
Well, we're going to talk all about this movie, specifically the high points and the positives, but the first thing we're going to do, as we always do, is talk about this cast, starting with the best casting and best performance of the film. Every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they single-handedly raise the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, kick us off here. Who gets your Mark Strong Award for Alien 3?
I got to go right to the top, man. My Mark Strong Award for Alien 3 goes to Sigourney Weaver in her third outing as Ellen Ripley.
100%, and it's not even close.
It's not even close. And part of that is just a lot of the characters in this movie are fodder, for lack of a better way to put it. This is there are some standout performances. I don't want to make it sound like there's not other people bringing their A game here. There definitely are. But this is her third outing. You've got a history with the character, you've got a familiarity with the character, and just an emotional attachment to it that it's just going to be difficult for anybody else to kind of get to that level. The things she's put through in this movie, which are all increasingly levels of awful, you feel the emotion of that. The first 10 minutes where she finds out that she's the only one that survived, you can sense that she's got this heartbreak, basically, that you got your happy ending at the end of the last one and it's gone. Like, you go to sleep and everything's good and you wake up and it's awful. Not too dissimilar from the setup of Aliens to a degree, where she wakes up and it's, way longer than she thought it was. But here, it's not just you now waking up in a completely different situation. Everything that you thought you had is gone. And it's the kind of it's an adjacent move with a vastly more sad outcome. And as the movie goes on and the gravity of the situation sinks in and she realizes that she's got this thing inside of her, there's a desperation that does come through in that as well. So she's kind of forced to not just battle the alien outside, she's also forced to battle the alien quite literally within. And it works.
That's a good tagline, Andrew.
It all works. She is owning it at every turn. She carries this movie. She probably broke her back carrying this movie. And that's not, again, that sounds backhanded, but it's not. She's just doing that much work here to make sure that this feels like a through line of this franchise. And by and large, I think she succeeds.
I agree. I mean, this might be the most badass Ripley we've seen. In that first movie, she's really just a survivor. It's her first, experience with a xenomorph, and she's just trying to live and escape. The second movie, she gets to fight back. She used to use a gun, and of course the big forklift robot thing, and she got plenty of badass moments there. But here, she is the only one with experience. She gets to, take charge of these men and tell them what to do. And she's got the shaved head, which just looks badass. Andrew, women with shaved heads, I mean, the 90s was like the heyday for that, right?
This and G.I. Jane, man.
This and G.I. Jane. You got Sinead O'Connor on SNL ripping up the Pope picture, like the big old thing. Like, it's, the time to do it.
It was a thing.
It's a good look.
Yeah, she's very hardened in this movie, and I think that's the difference. Like with Alien, she is a survivor. She gets through the events of Alien. She survives Alien. I think that's a good way to put it. With Aliens, she's initially kind of meant to be in the background, but obviously that kind of culminates in a lot of really awesome action sequences with the very iconic mech loader versus Alien Queen fight at the end, which is awesome. But in Aliens, she's in the action, but there's not this sense of not quite as hardened as she is here. By this movie, she's gone through all of these events, and now she's lost everybody. So there's this kind of further step in the evolution of the character from survivor to kind of full force in the action to now there's almost a weariness to it. Just this kind of sense of, I'm never going to be free from this, and now this is maybe finally my chance to finish the whole thing once and for all. And that requires her to sacrifice herself in the process, which I think is actually a perfect finish for the character. Well, as we know, this would not ultimately end up being the end for the character, but right. I think the story decisions in that regard were moving in the right direction.
I think, going back to Alien, I'd probably say she's the Mark Strong Award winner there. Aliens might be her biggest competition, though. She might be the Mark Strong Award winner, but also I love Lance Henriksen as Bishop, who we'll get to talk about here again later in this episode. I think Bill Paxton is just incredibly memorable and
making the most of his screen time
in that performance. Yep. And then Paul Reiser is such a sleazy, creepy bad guy. I love it.
I don't trust Paul Reiser in anything he's ever in now. Because I still suffer from trauma from Aliens. Like, he's in the new season of Stranger Things, and the whole time I'm just like, I can't trust you. Don't you try this crap. Don't listen to him.
Moving through the cast of Alien 3, we also have Charles S. Dutton as Leonard Dillon. He plays the sort of religious leader of this prison. These men have obviously sort of reached for something to hold on to, and they've sort of formed this religion. They don't go too deep into it, but it's obviously I don't know. It's obviously they're clinging on to their faith as like a reason to move forward. And again, it doesn't get to the specifics of like what the religion means or anything, but it is clearly led by Charles' character here of Dylan. And he's got the the pastor speak down, the very impassioned speeches and speaking pattern, and he plays it all very well.
Yeah, I mean, Charles S. Dutton is a great actor. Obviously, I think if you're not familiar with his background, I very much suggest reading into it. It does involve some very rough situations and multiple prison sentences before he kind of comes out on the other end. and ends up enrolling as a drama major because during one of his stints in solitary confinement, he was allowed to grab one book, and he grabbed a book of works by Black playwrights, and that kind of clicked acting in his head as something that could be where he goes. And ultimately,
very appropriate casting. Then I did not know about that background, but that's pretty cool.
And he wanted to start a drama group in the prison, and the warden agreed if he went back and got his GED, which he did, and basically was paroled in, like I said, the mid 70s, and then went into acting. His first role was, I think, in the 80s in a Stephen King adaptation called Cat's Eye. But I think that adds an interesting layer to the character here, because the idea of these guys is that they are essentially prison workers isolated on this refinery planet, and they're like bare bones. I think they said it was staffed for 5,000, but they currently are at 25. And he's kind of in their isolation. They've found this religion, they've found this belief structure, and he ends up being kind of not just the crux of that, but he's also one of the only things keeping it in line. When there's people that start kind of falling off the path, he's the one that takes it upon himself to I've got to re-educate some people, as he says at one point.
That's a nice way to put it. Yeah.
So I like the performance a lot. Obviously, a lot of people know Charles S. Dutton from Rudy, where he plays one of the people that's kind of helping Rudy through his whole process of getting to Notre Dame. The very famous slow clap gif of him is one of the ones that I see a lot. But yeah, I think this is a great performance. There is a lot of background to this religion that does get cut from the movie, that does show up in the assembly cut. So there was meant to be a lot more with this, but regardless of that, I think his run here is very good, and I think he gets to play with a lot more than some of the others do, with some of the morality of what's being asked of him at different times, and he does a great job.
Charles Dance plays Jonathan Clemens. He is the doctor here at the prison, a former prisoner himself, now turned the doctor. And he is sort of the one that Ripley confides in, and sort of the only one that is really actually nice to her. Everyone else sees her as a threat to their way of life and their system, and want to kind of keep her quarantined until they can get rid of her. But he's willing to listen to her and have a friendly relationship with her. And I really like this performance a lot, because you can tell, I mean, his character is very intelligent, probably the most intelligent person at that prison. And I think he shows that so well in very smart ways. Like, there's times when Ripley is keeping information from him and lying to him, and he goes along with it, but also says, okay, now tell me the truth. Tell me what's really going on. And it's just always even-keeled and calm, which, again, I think really relays the intelligence this character is supposed to have. Probably my favorite prisoner performance in this movie, even though he's not a prisoner. Favorite non-Ripley performance.
He was a prisoner.
Well, he was, but he's not currently a prisoner. Well, I guess he is. I mean, he's not technically a prisoner, but he's isolated in this prison for the rest of his life. Anywhere. So I don't know. Call it what you want.
It's but no, it's I agree completely. Charles Dance is an actor I know almost primarily for playing bad guys. He's notoriously, I would say without question, he's the Mark Strong of Last Action Hero, where he is arguably acting in a completely different movie from everybody else, because he's giving a fantastic stone cold villain performance in a movie that's kind of ridiculous. But one of my favorite scenes in that movie is where his villain character from a movie comes into the real world, and he shoots somebody outside like an auto repair shop at night, and he's like looking at his watch waiting for the cops to show up, and they're not coming. And he finally just goes like, hello, I've just shot someone, and I did it on purpose. And one dude just calls out, hey, shut up down there. Like, they don't care. And that's when he clicks for him that in the real world, the bad guys can win. But no, it's a genuinely I love the performance in that movie.
I haven't watched Last Action Hero in a very long time, but I got a feeling that maybe you can make that Mark Strong Award official one day on this podcast.
I would not doubt that. But obviously he was Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones. I remember he was the villain one of the villains in Godzilla King of the Monsters. pretty much everything he's in, I just see him as like a villain or like kind of a prick. And here he's actually like genuinely like one of Ripley's like biggest allies throughout the entire movie. He's the one that's like on her side, not really like, and he's completely unfazed by all the bureaucratic nonsense in the prison. The superintendent likes to puff himself up real big and cause a lot of trouble, and he's the one that's kind of like, whatever. Has some of my favorite lines in the movie. There's a scene where they're investigating the remains of one of the guys, and he's like, yeah, that's Murphy. And the guy's like, how do you know? And he's like, because that's his boot. And just, but I agree. It's probably my favorite prisoner performance or planet inhabitant performance, however you want to phrase it, in the film. I like just kind of the layers he brings to it. It is interesting too, because he was a prisoner and he did kill people, but it's not in the sense of many of the others where they were murderers or rapists. He's a doctor who got drunk and his decisions got a lot of people killed when he misprescribed painkillers. So it puts him apart to a degree as far as not quite being like the rest of them, but also still kind of being like the rest of them. But yeah, I like the performance a lot.
Brian Glover plays Harold Andrews, the warden of this prison. Very good performance because it annoys me greatly, which I think is the attention. He's the warden, but he's also a prisoner. He's just kind of like the guy in charge. But he speaks with this almost, I don't know, we would just call it like Shakespearean style of speaking. Like he's just high and mighty and above everyone else. And you really don't like this guy. And it feels very good when he gets his comeuppance. So testament to Brian for making it so irritating.
Yeah. Also, rest in peace, Brian Glover.
R.I.P.
But he is, he's so deeply unlikable in this movie. He's definitely playing in that vein of just he's the guy in charge and he loves throwing his weight around. But yeah, he's the guy in charge that just, again, Ripley is in a little bit of a strange thread through the movie. Ripley's not really being forthcoming about what this is. He's the first guy that she straight up tells, this is what's going on. And he, much like everybody else in the series to this point, is like, that's ridiculous, and doesn't take it seriously. And then ultimately, it costs him. And like you said, it's deeply satisfying.
Ralph Brown plays Francis Arrow. He's sort of the warden's right-hand man through most of this movie, at least while the warden is alive. He's always standing behind him and repeating like the last 3 words that he says, much like Timmy and Tommy from Animal Crossing. Someone gets that reference. And I like his performance throughout that part of it for sure, because while the warden is annoying, he's sort of like this humorous follow-up to all the annoying lines, the way he just kind of parrots what he says or whatever. And then once the warden is killed, they're like, well, who's going to be in charge now? And he's like, well, I guess I'm next up. And they laugh because no one takes him seriously. They looked at his file when he arrived and saw that his IQ is only 85. So they torment him by calling him 85. His role is just to be a dim-witted character that ultimately I have a lot of empathy for. I feel bad for him. I know it's a bunch of like prisoners and bad guys and killers, but come on, man. Why y'all got to pick on this guy?
Yeah, and I mean, I get it to a degree. You've been stuck here, and he's a guy that has a wife and a kid, and he wants to get out of this. But yeah, it's a very it's an interesting performance. He reminds me like this is a strange reference, but in all the Kevin Smith movies, there's that guy that's always like his friend says something, and there's the guy who's like, "Tell him, Steve, Dave." And he just reminds me of that, where he's like, the warden says something ridiculous, and he's the one that's just like, yeah, and just like walks off.
Contributing nothing.
Contributes nothing, or like you said, he just repeats part of what he said. I actually remember Ralph Brown notably as Del Preston in Wayne's World 2. He plays the roadie they seek out to help put on Wayne's stuff. He's the one when they find him, he's like sleeping, hanging upside down in one of his doorways. And he tells like the weird stories about like, stealing candy in Sri Lanka, formerly Ceylon. But so you want a wildly different performance from that, check out Alien 3, where he's not being anything like that. But it is interesting because he's the one that's the whole time this is going on, he's trying to be like, well, the rescue team is coming. The rescue team is coming. Let's just not do too much because he doesn't want to risk themselves because the rescue team is coming. And that's when Ripley kind of tells them all, it's like, if you think they're going to let any of you guys leave alive, especially if you've seen this thing, you got another thing coming. And then at the end, he kind of gets a sort of redemptive moment where, I don't know why I got so high-pitched when I just said that just now, Chris.
It hit you in the feels, Andrew? He gets talking about his redemption?
Yeah, but he does get, he realizes that, he brings these people in because he genuinely thinks they're going to help and is actually, like, upset when they're not. And so he actually, like, attacks one of them to give Ripley and some more time to kind of get away from them. And it's a nice little ripple to the character that, because he spends the whole movie kind of getting bagged on. And it's a nice moment at the end where he kind of overcomes his kind of natural instinct to not be involved, and actually assist in making sure the alien menace is eradicated. And what greater sacrifice is there, Chris?
None more greater.
Perfect.
Paul McGann plays Walter Golick. One of the more interesting prisoners and stories in this movie. There's a lot of prisoners. We probably won't talk about all of them, but they sort of each have their own characterization and different relationships to the characters and to the alien itself. He is actually a survivor of an alien attack and then sort of loses his mind throughout the movie. And there's more stuff with this character in the assembly cut, but just talking about the theatrical cut, you still see some crazy behind those eyes.
Yeah, he's one of the characters that probably loses a lot between the theatrical and the assembly cut. In the assembly cut, he ends up kind of being obsessed with the alien. He views the alien as almost this like superior being. So he actually ends up interfering with some of their plans to kill it because he's like, you can't do that. He gets like obsessed with it to that degree. And then ultimately at the end, he realizes that the alien doesn't care either way. So you get some of the crazy there. He survives one of the alien attacks. He's one of the only people in this movie that does. By and large, they all get attacked, and that's the end. He's one of the few that kind of gets attacked or is part of an attack and lives to see the rest of the day. But yeah, it's very interesting to watch this because Paul McGann, a few years after this, would become the 8th Doctor Who, which, a long-running British television show. Oddly enough, though, the version he plays was an attempt to bring the series to the States. And it was a television movie that is still in continuity with the British show, in case you weren't confused on how it all goes together. And that was actually his only performance as the character for a long time live action, because it did poorly. And then the series kind of lay dormant until the UK brought it back in 2005. And at that point, they had just moved to the 9th Doctor. They never really addressed what happened to the 8th. But eventually, later on, they did do a special where they showed the succession of multiple characters, and Paul McGann actually came back to reprise the role, which I thought was very cool. But he is almost unrecognizable here as Golick. And it's like I said, there are a lot of bald dudes in this movie that are prisoners, and they do admittedly start to bleed together a little bit. But some interesting ripples here with the character. I think the cut plot line would have definitely made it a little bit more interesting. The idea that he kind of gets a weird Stockholm syndrome about the alien. Like he watched this alien kill his friends, but instead of seeing that as a terrible thing, he ends up being, viewing it as a weird, almost messianic creature. And but as it is, like I said, you still get those hints. He still gets to kind of play with the kind of descent that the character goes through. And very interesting.
And then we have Lance Henriksen reprising his role as Bishop. I mean, technically he's playing two different characters here. He's got the reprisal of Bishop, which is the same Bishop from Aliens. And then we see him again at the end of the film, which is very cool. It's very cool that he came back just to do these small parts. Whenever he's playing Bishop, it's a voice-only role because what's left of the android is played by animatronics. And then at the end, we see him show up and claim to be the creator of the Bishop line of androids, and that he's actually a human. Before we break down his performance, Andrew, do you believe him when he says that? I think he's lying.
I absolutely believe he's lying. I think.
Yeah. He's still an android at the end, right?
Yeah. It's just a different android that it was designed around the idea of we're going to create, essentially what he says, but, they wanted to give you a familiar face. Yeah, but we don't want you to know it's an android. So I know he gets whacked on the head really hard. I don't really see the white blood or anything, so they kind of keep it a little questionable. But I don't believe that's a real person.
It's not Lance Henriksen at all.
That's not Lance Henriksen. That's a picture of Lance Henriksen.
No, I love the performance. This dude just has such a presence. I love his such a distinct face, such a cool voice. Awesome. If like I said, he's a contender for Mark Strong Award in Aliens. If he had a larger role here, he could probably be a contender again. But I think he's used absolutely perfectly, sort of just above cameo. And it's cool that they kind of use him for these two different characters. Nothing bad to say about this. I think it's awesome.
I agree. I think it's a cool little. The end is kind of a fun little cameo, if you want to call it that, where he kind of gets to take on the role of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. He basically is speaking on their behalf. And, maybe he was telling the truth that they wanted to get the thing out of Ripley, but then they were going to keep it and study it. Like, you don't know, but at the end of the day, they want to keep it. And that's all Ripley needs to know to be like, all right, I have to destroy it. But I love Lance Henriksen. Pretty much everything he's in, he's a standout. He's a featured actor in The Quarry, the recent PS5 game, Supermassive, that came out. He's one of the people that's featured in that. Small part, but bringing that. Chris, what's that word I'm looking for?
Gravitas.
There it is. So smooth, so crisp, so beautiful. But pretty much anything is in. It's actually fun too because he's inadvertently made a lot of appearances in various different slasher genres. He's also was in the original Terminator, so he's in Terminator and he's in Aliens, joining that elite company with Bill Paxton and a few others. But he was in the original Pumpkinhead. He showed up in some of the Hellraiser movies. He's obviously a minor character in Scream 3. He's
long line
everywhere.
at the comic conventions. His booth.
Yeah, you could get 47
coming.
things signed by him, and it still wouldn't be everything. I think he's fantastic, and a bit of a spoiler for you, Chris. We may not be done with Lance Henriksen in this series.
Oh, okay. Exciting. I'm excited to see him show up again because I love the guy and love the performance.
Yep.
Andrew, that knocks out the key players, I think, in this cast. But like I said, it's a very deep cast. There's a lot of prisoners. Is there any other shout-outs we need to address here?
These are just kind of rapid fire. Danny Webb plays Robert Morse. He's kind of a very, Wiki describes him as an acerbic, self-centered, cynical prisoner, which is, that could describe any of them. Do you have any idea how much that doesn't narrow it down, Wikipedia? But he's the one, ultimately the only one that survives. So, he's the one that does also help Ripley in the end kind of finally get in position to end it. So I just want to give him a shout out. Pete Postlewaite, who also recently just passed away, plays one of the smart R.I.P. Also apparently plays a prisoner named David Postlewaite. So just keeping his last name. He is one of the ones who was ultimately killed during the big chase down sequence. Peter Guinness plays another one of the prisoners. Holt McCallany, a veteran of the show, for showing up as Wade in The Losers. For anyone who remembers, the slightly dim-witted but witty partner of Max in that film. He shows up as another one of our kind of faceless prisoners here. He plays Junior, who is one of the group that tries to kind of assault Ripley at one point in the film and then gets re-educated by Charles S. Dutton. So
A
But yeah.
longtime collaborator with David Fincher, shows up in Fight Club and Mindhunter.
And yeah, even Charles Dance made his way back around to David Fincher with Mank. He showed up in that as well. So it's kind of cool to see some of these people come back around. But yeah, Holt is definitely one that comes back more often than not. Anyway, yes. Otherwise, there's a lot of other names. I don't recognize a lot of them, but a lot of these guys really are literally just here to die. There's not a whole lot of other method to the madness. Michael Biehn, our good old Corporal Dwayne Hicks, does get a single appearance in an archival picture, but apparently negotiated himself quite the payday for it. So good for you, Michael Biehn. Get that. Always be closing.
We do see his body, but it is quite mangled
Yes,
beyond recognition.
He got leafed in the wind. But that's a reference you don't understand, or is it?
I don't. Do I want to?
Okay. It's from the Firefly movie. You'll learn when you're older.
Okay. Serenity. I know the name of the movie, right?
Yes, that's the movie. Yes.
There you
One
go.
of the characters.
Something.
I'm just going to tell you. One of the characters meets his demise because he says he crashes the ship and lands it, and they're all alive, and he's like, "I'm a leaf on the wind," and then a support beam comes straight through the window and stabs him.
Oh, he got Trinity'd.
Yes. Oh, right. We've been apparently that's been happening forever. But yeah. But otherwise, yeah, it is a deep cast, but we probably have a core group of about 5 characters here that are really the driving force of a lot of the action. But a lot of people really stepping up here. It can't be understated that the cast is definitely bringing it here.
Well, let's jump into what they are bringing. Let's talk about the scenes of this movie, specifically the best scenes of the film. We're going to start with a high point and the best scene of the movie, our favorite scene of the movie at the very least. Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders, and what is your favorite scene of Alien 3?
I gotta go with the climax. There's a lot of character moments in this that I really, really liked. There was a lot of moments where the characters, you were kind of expecting some of them to go wrong, and they don't. They kind of all stay on the right side as far as making sure this kind of gets to where it needs to be. And I think it really works. So this is basically everything has gone wrong. The rescue team is en route. Ripley tells Aaron that they can't come here. They're just coming to take it. We can't let them do that. And Aaron is kind of flabbergasted because as far as he's concerned, they're the cavalry. Why wouldn't you want them to come? And so that kind of sets into motion here the kind of final set pieces where the prisoners, Ripley, and everybody kind of all join together to kind of force the alien into this shaft where a piston is going to come out and force it into kind of this part of the refinery plant where they're basically going to drown it in lead, essentially. And obviously, there's lots of issues with that. Things don't quite go as planned. We lose pretty much all of our prisoners at this point outside of Morse. Dylan meets his demise in here as well. Big moment. But ultimately, it kind of comes down to the Yutani Corp and Morse, Ripley, and Aaron. Those are pretty much our only players left at a certain point. But this kind of first culminates with the fight against the original alien, where it gets doused in lead, and then it jumps out of the lead. Looks gnarly as heck.
So I love the look of that alien.
That is so awesome.
So awesome.
Because obviously it's now covered in this stuff, but it didn't kill it. It's still going. And so at this point,
it looks like an unpainted model.
Yeah.
Like if you were to get like a model of an alien that
it's like
unpainted,
silver,
like
it looks
matte
cool,
gray,
gold,
silver.
yeah.
It's awesome.
It's awesome. Looks cool. So Ripley is kind of trying to get away because it's still alive, and ultimately they kick on the sprinklers, which just rapidly cool it, and it friggin' explodes. Awesome.
Explodes.
He's covered in lead. They cool that temperature too fast, and it cracks and it explodes. I don't know if the science is completely right on that, but it looked cool as heck. So I'm not going to have any problems with it. And then that kind of trips us into our final sequence where now Ripley has to deal with the alien queen inside of her. Don't know why I just gestured to my own stomach. Doesn't really help. But And I love this sequence too, because we've got Morse and Ripley that have now been confronted by Bishop II and the rest of the Weyland-Yutani crew, and they're kind of having this weird face-off. And then this is where Aaron gets his big moment, where he gets to he smacks Bishop right in the head. It's pretty satisfying. Then Ripley and Morse kind of back themselves up over one of the molten kind of pits, and she takes the dive off, and then the alien bursts out of her chest, and she holds it it into her body. Apparently that was a later addition. That wasn't in the original script. I do think this was a cool moment to add to it, where she is taking control and not letting this continue. And ultimately she crashes into the molten lava. And you would think that is the end for the character.
Well, the next movie is called Alien Resurrection for a reason, but that's a story for another time.
That's a story for 7 days from now. But
next week.
But either way, I love this whole sequence. These sequences, this is a lot of things in a row. I can't probably cheating to call it my favorite sequence, but I just really like seeing it all come together. Everybody's kind of on the same page because there is a lot of tension throughout a lot of this movie. So to kind of have everybody kind of barreling to the end, playing their parts in the plan. Like I said, there's a lot of parts where you could expect characters to, and when they need to go left, they go right. They don't. A lot of them all stay on track and are trying to make this all happen. A few, obviously, moments that are played for tension where you're like, is he going to do the right thing or isn't he? And then they do. And it's a good flip on what your expectation is, because your expectation through a lot of this is, all right, who's going to be the one that doesn't go along with it? Who's going to be the double cross? And so we don't get that. Aaron is as close as you get to the double cross, but even he double crosses the double cross and plays his part. So, but yeah, I love this whole sequence. It's great. I love it. And everybody in it kind of gets their moments to shine. Dutton, even like I said, some of the minor prisoners like Danny Webb as Morse and Pete Postlethwaite as David, they all get moments, and I think it's all cool. They all run with it and are having, like I said, some big, fun action set pieces. Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff to like here. I like whenever she sort of, Ripley has a moment of rallying the troops to get them to go along with this plan, because they all feel like, things are hopeless. They're just going to try to wait it out for the rescue team, what they think is the rescue team. And she's trying to convince them that the Weyland Corporation isn't going to show up and rescue people. They have ulterior motives. And she tells them, they didn't care about, paraphrasing, but the events of Alien 1. They didn't care about the events of Aliens. She says, what makes you think they're going to care about a bunch of lifers who found God at the ass end of space? I love that line so much.
That's a great line. And it's again, it just kind of plays into that kind of next stage of the character where there's just no, I can't say the word I'd like to say, but there's
putting on the kitty gloves. There's no softening it up.
There's no softening. There's no energy left to deal with any nonsense.
Yes.
There's no. I'm not gonna say it, but you know what I mean, folks.
We got it.
She's all out, and these moments are all great, and they just kind of really they just add to the mythology and kind of the almost mythic stance of the creature the mythic stance of the character of just this kind of why this character is so highly regarded by so many, and why I have her signature on an Alien poster.
Very cool, Andrew. You got to post that on the socials. But I talked already about how every movie in this franchise tries different things as far as tone and genre. And I do like how this one harkens back to the original a little bit by bringing it back to one alien threat, trapped in a facility with all these, people that it's going to kill, versus the second one, which is an all-out war against the aliens. And so it brings back some of the horror elements. It's not a straight-up horror film like that first movie is, but there's a genuinely unnerving part during this sequence that really makes me feel uncomfortable, because they're kind of leading this alien through a maze, so it finally ends up in the piston room, and they keep losing track of it because it's so fast and it kills people. And one of the prisoners is walking up to check on his inmate, and they're part of the plan, looking for the alien. And it's just, there's no music. It's almost silent. He walks into this room, and it's slowly revealed. You see the tail wagging, and then as he passes the doorway, you see the entire scene of the alien just eating this inmate, just going to town and just moving so
Oh,
unnaturally
man.
because it's just
so...
and it's the silence that's so unnerving, and it holds it for so long, and we're just watching this gnarly scene play out, and it makes me uncomfortable like seeing that, and then it notices this guy and takes off, chasing after him, and it's one of the creepiest scenes, honestly, of the franchise up to this point. Like I said, this movie as a whole doesn't go full on horror, but that scene right there, there's a couple of them where you see it like eating in silence. It's the lack of crescendo in the score that makes it scary. It's just so unassuming, but what you're watching is so violent and gross and otherworldly that I find it very effective.
That is actually there's a song, there's a very famous orchestral piece that is just silence. That's literally what it is. But sometimes silence is the most effective thing you can use as far as the score goes. When you just there's a movie called Last House on the Left. Those of you that have seen it know what it's about, and you know that it features many brutal scenes. But there is a particularly brutal scene that plays out with no soundtrack. You are just listening to the events happen, and it makes it all the more sickening, unnerving, everything. Like, it's just having to listen to the events are so much worse than if it was playing some like kind of music over it. And this is a scene that just plays on that same kind of idea of the reality of it is so much more unsettling than any score could add to it. And I do want to give a shout out. It's Tom Woodruff Jr. who plays the alien in this movie. And he's going to town. Obviously, there are a lot of effect shots of the alien here. They do play with the... I mentioned this last week with the Predator, but one of the other things that happens with the aliens in these movies, and it really doesn't happen too much in the first two because the aliens are all birthed from humans. This is the first movie where the alien is birthed from something else.
Right.
In the theatrical, it's a dog. In the assembly cut, it was an ox. Which leads to some of the weird differences between. But as such, you get kind of an alien that's running around like an animal more than kind of bipedal or anything like that. And but yeah, he's playing the alien here. He's very effective at it. But just a lot of the ways they play the alien in this movie make it all the more unnerving, where in the original, it was a lot more cloak and dagger. And in this one, it is he's outrunning you. Like, you can't catch it. You can't find it. It's doing all of this, and it's just a cool little ripple to the mythology.
Yeah, I like the alien design in this movie. I know that's a complaint that some people have. It's not the traditional xenomorph. Yeah. But like you said, it's a cool evolution of the mythos and the character, because those first two movies, you watch them now, you have no reason to think that the alien is humanoid because it comes from a human. You just think, oh, that's
what they look like.
That's what they look like, exactly. But yet now we learn that it's like a mashup of DNA based on its host, which is pretty cool, and it's continued to explore that as the franchise goes on. But yeah, this is the first time that kind of acknowledges that. And I think it's, like I said, a very cool ripple. I like the design. I like that it's different. I will say there's obviously a man in a suit at times. There's also stop motion at times. There's CG at times. And some of the effects maybe aren't as timeless as what we saw in those first two movies, which are almost all practical because of the time that they were made. But I still think it holds up. I still think it looks cool. Like, if your complaint is that it's dated, okay, it's a little dated. But the movie was nominated for an Academy Award for special effects. So I'm going to say that at the time, in '92, this was top of the line.
Can't trust the Academy, Chris. They don't know what's up.
I don't mean to put too much stock into the Academy, because it does have its issues. But I think the effects in this movie are fine.
I agree. I think it looks fine by and large. I think if you're, like I said, if the only thing you're pointing out is that the CG looks dated, I don't know, dude. Go watch The Matrix again. There's plenty of movies that came out that are still revolutionary and still fantastic. Then you're going to rewatch and be like, it's a little rough. But yeah, I think this is good. I like that. I like that ripple to the aliens, and yeah, it makes it all the more creepy. And yeah, we do get that iconic scene of Ripley kind of against the wall with...
I would argue that's the most iconic shot of any alien movie.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
It's easily the most parodied. I mean, anytime you see like a parody, it's always her crying.
It's her against the wall and the alien thing coming in.
the one that's like the stapler that comes out,
Yeah,
and then
the
it shoots
stapler.
the staples.
Shoots the staples. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
it's so
that's
good. I love it.
It's so good, and it creates that tension, and it's your first hint that something is up.
Why is it
Because
not
you
killing
don't
her?
you don't realize initially that something is off. Of course, once Ripley reveals something is off, any adept viewer is going to put together that, yep, there's something inside of her, because she's so paranoid about it. And rightfully so, because she eventually does find out that the ship crashed because there was an alien on it. And it just adds a new ripple to that. But yeah, that's your first clue, that sequence where the alien doesn't kill her, that something is off. That something is not necessarily off, but for some reason the alien is sparing her.
Yeah.
And they play with that concept a little bit more in the next one, which again, 7 days from now. But and then that becomes a building theme, that she realizes that she's kind of sick, but it's the ripple there is that it's taking a lot longer. In Alien, I think it's just a few hours between when
they wake up,
implanted.
They go eat dinner, and then it busts out and does a song and dance on the table, right?
Yeah, that's Alien. There's one where they play it serious. I think it's Spaceballs, but in Alien, it does the same song that Michigan J. Frog does. But
yeah, that is one of the most iconic shots in the franchise in this movie. And the other one of the most iconic shots, I think, is Ripley swan diving into the. I assume molten lead, but now it looks like an explosion behind her. But we know what's happening. She's killing herself, and that her falling backwards is just an image that's been burned into my memory since before I actually saw this movie. Like, I saw that on cable or whatever. And there are two versions of it. I believe in the assembly cut, the alien does not burst out of her chest.
Right.
She just falls into it. Either one is fine. I can see an reasoning for both. I think the assembly cut just focuses on her sacrifice, which is what's most important. You could argue that it busting out is unnecessary because it's the same result, but I like that she grabs on and holds on to it. To the very end, she's fighting to kill this. And I think that's pretty cool. And I'm not going to complain about gore in an alien movie. It's expected. It's what these things do. Yeah. So I think it's very cool. What I would not have liked is if it busts out of her chest and leaps away to leave the door open for a future movie. It would totally undercut her sacrifice. So I like that in either version, the alien is getting killed. Very cool way to end the movie. Andrew, you're right. You're kind of cheating by saying the whole finale is your favorite scene, but it all runs together. It works, and I get why you would pick that as your favorite.
Right.
I'm going to highlight something else to balance things out. You nominated a 30-minute sequence. I'm going to highlight a 5-minute sequence as my favorite scene of the movie. I love that she goes and gets Bishop's remains to listen to the audio back from the craft that crashes. I think it's such a cool plot point. It's such a cool way to bring Bishop back because, it says very early on, you're the only survivor, everything's dead. We just don't even think anything of it, Bishop being killed. But he's an android, so it didn't quite mean the same thing. So she gets his remains, which is essentially his head and one arm, part of his chest. And she hooks him up and gets him working again just enough to do what she needs to play the audio from on board the ship. And I love it because it's a cool way to bring Bishop back. I like that it's not the actor. It is all animatronic, so they can really make him look messed up and gnarly. And it doesn't look bad because it's not supposed to be a human. It's supposed to be an animatronic. It's supposed to be a robot, a droid. And I just think it's a clever way to do that. I like how Bishop himself, you can tell his conscience, whatever that means, is still there. And the scene ends after he gives Ripley the information that she needs by him saying, "I can be reworked, but I'll never be top of the line again. Disconnect me. Kill me. Let me die. I don't want to be a shell of my former self." And it's just so cool for an android to kind of express the same sentiment that you might see from a human character that is in a low quality of life situation, just in their own way. I just thought that was very neat. And then lastly, the crucial piece of information that Ripley gets here is that all the information from the shuttle has been sent back to the Wayland Corporation. So she knows they're going to be on their way to try to capture this thing because they realize that there's an alien still out there. So it's got a cool story purpose. It's a clever way to bring Lance Henriksen back. It's cool effects. I love it. Favorite scene in the movie.
I agree completely. Like I said, the idea that he kind of gets he kind of basically says, "This is awful. Turn me off." Like just the idea of like
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
the
I think he says,
notion that like
my legs hurt. 'Cause
but
it
yeah,
doesn't
like he
have
starts off with saying his legs hurt, and then I think he says, it's something more about like pain or something. He's like, I don't want to feel this.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't want to feel this, and please turn me off. And she's like, Are you sure? And he's like, Yeah, I'd rather feel nothing than feel this. I'd rather be nothing than feel this, because
Yeah.
that's the key. It's not even feeling nothing. It's like I would rather not be alive than deal with this. And there is a deep that's a heavy statement there. But I think it is great. Like you said, it's a chance to get Lance Henriksen back. They do make this look gnarly. It's prosthetics. It's all wild, and it just helps build a sense of continuity, because it makes it feel more like a third installment versus just kind of a new movie with Ripley at the center. And I like when you see those sorts of things now, because it feels fairly organic versus kind of a forced cameo or something like that. I think all of that flows together really well. And if this had been the end, it would have been a pretty good end, as like an Alien trilogy. Obviously, as we know that this did not stay that way. We got Alien 4, and then obviously we have Ridley Scott's kind of prequels that he's done. But
The collection that I have is called the Alien Quadrilogy, because it's the first 4 movies, and that is clearly outdated at this point.
yes, that's, it's like somebody put out a box set of the first 4 seasons of Stranger Things, and there's a 5th one coming. I'm like, why would you do that? It's like, why, like, there's another one coming. Why would you do it? But no, I do really like the scene. Obviously, like I said, Lance Henriksen is one of the goats, and this is just a nice way to kind of move the plot forward, involve a primary character from Aliens in a very meaningful way, and give him at least one of the one thought at the end of that scene was, I'm like, at least somebody from Aliens got to send off, like
Yeah.
man, because they do those other 3 characters pretty dirty. Not in like a negative way. The story they were telling is the story they were telling, but like he's the only one that really kind of gets the PS and kind of gets to tie up his story a little bit. But they do it in a very effective way that helps and moves the story forward. So, fantastic choice.
At one point, Ripley refers to Bishop as a droid. Andrew, I'm going to be honest with you. Don't tell anybody this. It's kind of embarrassing. This is the first time in my life I realized that droid is just short for android. Those were always 2 separate things in my mind.
Okay, Chris, I won't tell anyone.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I was about
But
to wonder if there's a difference. Like, is an android something that looks like a human, and a droid is just a machine?
I don't know. A droid, I think of Star Wars. Those are
Yeah.
all droids, right?
Because those
And
are all
you're
just
right,
machines. They don't look like human. They're humanoid.
But droid is just short for android, right? Like, I think in the Alien franchise, up until this point, they've called them androids. And now all of a sudden she's saying droid, so I assume that's just short for android. But I think you're right. I think the difference between a robot and android is that androids are humanoid. But droid, I don't know. But it was a revelation to me.
Well, we're all learning things today.
But you mentioned those other characters dying, so let's talk about that really quickly. Of course, hashtag Positivity Podcast. We're talking about the positives of Alien 3, but we have to acknowledge that the movie starts off with 2 characters that are main characters in Aliens that we grow to like and even love in Aliens, that are important to Ripley, getting killed essentially off screen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we see their dead bodies, but like when the movie starts, they are dead. And it doesn't just like they're dead, move on. We watch Ripley mourn over them, especially over Newt. Andrew, they do an autopsy on Newt's body, and Newt is a 12-year-old character. I think that's like a dummy in all those shots. I don't think it's an actual 12-year-old girl, but the idea is they're inspecting this young girl's dead body for an alien, and they do an autopsy, and they crack open her chest, and they don't show it outright, but it's almost worse. Kind of like we're saying earlier, sometimes there's things you don't see. Like you see like the scalpel being picked up, and then you see like blood splatter in like the chest of it. Like it's pretty
Pretty brutal.
gruesome. I will say this though, that scene is the most David Fincher scene of the movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's got his, of course, dark sensibilities. It's got his color palette that he loves, the blues, and the different shades of blue and like the hush tones. Most of this movie kind of takes on like a brown and gray look because of the facility, but that scene in the autopsy room is the David Fincher color palette, and just the close-ups of all the the close-up of all the utensils, and then the way they're covered in blood. It's very meticulous, and the white gloves. It's got David Fincher's fingerprints all over it.
Well, no, it doesn't because they're wearing gloves. Sorry. But yeah, this scene is particularly brutal, and I think that's actually it's an interesting observation, and I think it's part of the issue people had overall with the treatment of those characters is that it's off screen, and then anything else with the characters is just like a further, like I said, it's an autopsy. It's not like a anything else, and so that's a particularly brutal way to do it. But I think, like you said, it's the most David Fincher scene in the whole movie by a huge stretch.
And then minutes after that, they kill a dog. So, like, if it's not bad enough that, like, there's a kid, like, a dog has to die for the aliens. Like, the two most innocent things we don't like seeing being killed on screen. So the movie has a bit of a, I'll say, like, hole to kind of climb out of, because it's going to pitch you, like, in the dumps early on. Yeah. But I think ultimately, #PositivePodcast, it succeeds. By the end of the movie, I think it's kind of overcome that bleakness that it starts off with. And it does have a bit of, Ripley dies in the end, so it's kind of a downer ending, but still... Thematically, I think it's a satisfying conclusion to the trilogy, like you were saying earlier.
I agree. Like I did. I said it earlier, so of course I agree. Yeah.
The movie's got. It's not a comedy, but there's a few humorous scenes I do want to shout out. We talked about how satisfying it is for the warden to get killed, and he gets killed in front of everyone. Like he's in the cafeteria, and the alien lifts him up through the ceiling and rips him to shreds. And the only reaction is one prisoner just staring up at him and just goes, that's it. That's all we get. And then we just move on. Perfect. Enough said.
The follow-up to that scene I like, where in the aftermath someone is like mopping the floor like under where he got like sucked up, and the dude just like keeps like he pushes the mop like as far away from his body as he can, and then like is occasionally like looking up through the window where he got like pulled up through, just trying to it's like I gotta clean the floor, but I really don't want to get sucked up through the ceiling like you did.
It's very good. I also love a line towards the end where Ripley is describing the nature of the xenomorph to the other guys. She says, because she knows where it's going to be nearby where they're all gathering, and she says it's like a lion. Sticks close to the zebras. And the prisoner goes, zebras? Oh, right. We're the zebras. It's good. And one gnarly scene talking about the effects of this movie is whenever Ripley finds out there's an alien inside of her, they're doing essentially, I guess it's not a sonogram because they're looking for like broken bones and hemorrhages. So it's a feature X-ray. So where you can see like everything in the body.
It's a live X-ray.
Yeah, there you go. And you see the little alien inside of her, and it looks crazy. It looks gnarly. Yeah. And it's actually, because the poster for this movie is a little weird. It's like an alien face that like spirals out into a tail. Like it's not a full-grown xenomorph. And this is essentially what that poster is. They're putting it right there on the poster. It's the alien that's inside of Ripley. I think it's pretty cool.
It is. That looked really cool, and like that's obviously one of the big turning points in the kind of the third act of the movie is that there's an alien inside of her. And not just is it an alien, it's an alien queen who can lay all the eggs and make thousands more of them.
Andrew, I got a confession to make. I like this movie. I enjoy watching it. I think it's a good one. It's not perfect, but that's, you shouldn't judge movies by whether or not they're a masterpiece or not. Like, there's plenty of room in between there. And I think that's where the legacy of this movie comes from. Alien and Aliens are just on such big pedestals. They are near perfect movies. Some would say they are perfect movies. As the franchise goes on, it's bound to not have a perfect movie. It's bound for a misstep or production troubles or for elements not to come together. And you probably have some criticisms here or there of this movie, and that's fine. Maybe it's not the best of those original three. I would agree with that. but it's still good. It still does interesting things. It's still worth watching if you're, want to make your way through the Alien movies. I wouldn't say skip this movie by any means. If you're a David Fincher fan, it's a cool movie to study because you get to see some early David Fincher isms in the movie. There's a lot to like here, which, that's the point of our podcast, Andrew, right?
Yeah, I guess so. When I really sit down and think about it. No, but I agree. I think the legacy of the film is just when you're put up against two stone cold classics, you're always going to come up short. I think it was a high bar, and I think when you really look at the history of the film, it was always going to kind of be difficult for something to really kind of reach those heights when there was so much overwatch of what was going on here. But I think Fincher puts together a promising film. I do recommend checking out the assembly cut if you're kind of interested in seeing some of the, because it's kind of thing where if there's a concept in this movie that you think is interesting that doesn't really get explored very much, it's probably got a little bit more time in the assembly cut. That being said, I think the movie as it existed is still pretty good. Fincher obviously had a vision that he was trying to execute. He ran into some issues with that, but between the cast, the effects, even the way the movie is shot, there are still plenty of memorable things here where he comes through and is able to shine through and really put together something that, like we said, still has some of the most memorable shots of the franchise, if not the most memorable shots of the franchise.
Andrew, this is a very fun theme, Alien and Predator. I love both of these franchises. It's got ups and downs, but I'm having a good time revisiting a lot of these. As we've kind of alluded to, next week, we're going to be covering Alien Resurrection, a movie I think I've seen a total of 2 times, maybe once. That is not one that I've revisited a lot. I've got my opinions on it, but it's going to be fun to go back with, the hashtag PP mindset and really dig in for what's working in that movie.
Yes.
You agree?
It's going to be an interesting one to dive into. A bit probably would have fit in with our Black Sheep month as well. Alien Resurrection is often seen as the one that's kind of the odd man out. So yeah, definitely looking forward to diving into that one and seeing if it's as weird as I remember it is.
But for now, it's time for the question of the week. This week, it is coming from Fridge Boy, who asks there in our Discord. If you haven't joined our Discord already, there's a link in the show notes. Go ahead and do it. Here's what they ask. Who does the best superhero landing? Now, we all know what a superhero landing is, right? I mean, when I think superhero landing, I think of 1 foot, 1 knee, 1 fist, right? That's the 3-point landing. That what comes to mind for you, Andrew?
Yeah, and the other hand is kind of like out to the side.
Yeah, or flexing sometimes, or yeah, it's good. I am going to go with the first one to come to mind is Iron Man.
Yeah.
And the reason I like it is he strikes the pose. I mean, he's doing that pose on the poster for Iron Man 3. But what I love about his landing is the weight. I love when he hovers above the ground and then shuts off his jets and just clunk, like falls to the ground. Like, boom, you feel the weight of that suit. It makes such a satisfying hero landing, especially like when it cracks the concrete.
Oh, yeah.
You got to wonder who pays for all that, Andrew. But I love that landing, and it comes really down to sound design as far as what puts it over the rest for me.
I agree. That's the one I think of first, whether it's, Iron Man 2 at the beginning where he's crashing down like in the big Stark Expo or any of the other moments, Avengers, whatever. But yeah, that they made that from a design perspective very unique, very standout. And yeah, that was instantly the first thing that came to mind for me was that.
We got to shout out Black Widow though, right? I mean, there's a whole bit
where they
in
make
the Black
the joke
Widow movie.
It, yes.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty great. I do like when Yelena does it and she's just like, she's all just like she does it and is just disgusted that she did it. I think a more recent shout out that I have to, just because of how cool it is, has to be the 3 Spider-Men in No Way Home when they do.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
When they like all jump off the Statue of Liberty and they're all webbing around, throwing each other, and then they just land consecutively in a row. I was so giddy watching that. It was just ridiculous. It was that thing that was rumored. for years, and then there it finally was, and I was watching it. Now it's just cool.
Yeah. Very good. I think it was definitely high points. We got to shout out Superman, someone who probably saw Landing before anyone else. And just to throw a little bit of variety in there, I want to shout out Magneto, because he doesn't land like anyone else. He slowly descends like a god with his hands outstretched and his feet softly touch the ground. I like that style of landing too, because it's got such a menacing bad guy presence to it.
Right. It's got that air of like, I'm better than you and I know it.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously Superman's had a variety of different landings. I know Henry Cavill has done like the classic superhero. I know BVS, before the big fight with Batman, he does like a classic, like stomps down into the ground. Christopher Reeve obviously had a much more graceful kind of landing most of the time, where he kind of came down like Magneto, but without any of the pomp and ego. It was more of just kind of graciously landing. So yeah, but those are I think the highlights. Real simple list.
If you want to let us know your favorite superhero landing, you can do that in our Discord, like I already mentioned. You can send us an email, bestoftherestpod@gmail.com. Hit us up on Twitter. We're very easy to get a hold of. You hear that, Stephen E. D'Souza? We're very easy to get a hold of. And until next week, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram @NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter @I'mABiggieBoy. Check the show notes for his SoundCloud link. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. It's the only way that we're going to grow. And follow us on social media @BOTRcast. Thank you.